welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we're doing something quite a bit different. Unless you've been around here for a while, then you have seen me do this before, but basically what we're doing today is I am going to show you a travel vlog from one of my most recent trips. Recently, I went to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Montevideo, Uruguay. So I'm going to take you along for these. This is going to be part one, which is where we stayed in the Palermo neighborhood of Buenos Aires, as well as visited Colonia del Sacramento. This includes like some botanic gardens and some different like architecture tours and a vintage shopping tour. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely stick around. I also understand this is not my usual content, so if a travel vlog is not for you, I will be back with a sewing video next week. So I will see you then. I get that these videos are oftentimes more for me than anyone else because they are kind of an anomaly in my video content. But with that, we're gonna go ahead and kick off with the footage from the flight to Buenos Aires. We start by our landing in Buenos Aires, which happened at about 8 a.m. in the morning, just after sunrise. We chose to do a overnight flight, and by chose, I mean there's one flight that goes to Buenos Aires a day, and this is the time. So that was our choice. We flew United, which is fine. I personally don't like United unless it's like international to the place that I'm going with the least amount of transfers. So that's why we're on a United flight. But the city looks beautiful going in, and you can tell just how giant it is. So we're pretty exhausted from about 24 hours of travel and ready to get on the ground. After we stopped at the hotel to drop our bags, we went to a park where we watched the galgos or greyhounds all run around. It was super fun. It was a Sunday, so everybody was out and about doing things, including these cute greyhounds. We sat here for a while just trying to get our bearings because we knew we were going to do our money withdrawals and had to kind of get our bearings for that. I did not show you any footage of us getting money because that would have been weird, but we waited in line for Western Union for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. Western Union is the easiest way to get the blue rate, I believe, of Argentinian money, which doubles the amount your dollars go in Argentina, so it's really important to get that rate, but it was a little bit challenging, so I will talk about that at the end of this video a little bit. We decided to just wander parks until we could check into our hotel, which we really wanted to do as soon as possible. So we wandered around and we wandered into what they call the Eco Park, which is their old zoo. They closed the zoo in 2016 and relocated most of its animals to either wildlife sanctuaries, the wild, or other zoos, and they now just have very, very, very few animals, which include like ducks and flamingos and these little rodent things called maras, which are the little rodents you're going to see strewn out throughout this eco park. This eco park also just features a ton of different styles of architecture, including this, which is a replica of a Roman building that was used for the breastfeeding room. What you'll see as we go around Argentina, or Buenos Aires specifically, is lots of types of buildings here. That is because that is back when Argentina was wealthy, which was between 1860 and 1930. So most of the rich buildings you see were built during that time. So a lot of this is Victorian, Edwardian, and Art Deco area into the Art Nouveau style. So this zoo was actually designed in that era, and it's why like most of these buildings I want to say are built between 1900 and 1910, and is a good reason that they closed the zoo, because obviously a zoo designed back then is not adequate to take good care of the animals. But the buildings are really, really beautiful and interesting to look at, and I did enjoy the few animals they had there, which were the maramaras, and we did see a couple muskrats, so that was kind of fun. But overall it was just really pretty to walk around this zoo while trying to kill time in between when we got our money and when we needed to check into the hotel. Also, I do want to know at some point we had a meal in here, but I was tired and it was not recorded. After checking in the hotel, we ended our day in yet another park. We ate some locally made empanadas while watching all the people mingle. It was a beautiful day out. It was just the beginning of spring, so it had that like really exciting time to be in a city vibe to it. And that is it for today. This morning I think is the perfect time to give you a little hotel tour. This room is quite big and spacious, and it has a king bed, which you know I love. One person in a king bed is awesome, and it is just a really nice room, really big mirror, which I appreciate, so I can, you know, make sure I look cute. And then we also have like a tiny little kitchenette, which I didn't use, but if you were here longer term, this would obviously be ideal, or if you wanted to save some money by being able to not eat out. The bathroom in here overall was fine. The shower was fine. Actually, this is the best shower of all the hotels I stayed at. However, I hated the sink. I don't like this basin style, and the drain was really loud. And then there is a toilet and a European style bidet. So nothing too crazy, but overall a really nice room, and we're in a really nice part of town. We're in the Palermo district by all the gardens. So we're by the Japanese garden, the Botanical garden, and the Eco Park. So we're surrounded by parks, and of course there's a good feature here of the balcony. The balcony had a beautiful view. It was honestly a little bit too cold, so I didn't spend much time out on the balcony, but if you were here in the warmer months, I think this would be really beautiful. I do still feel like this hotel was maybe a little scammy, which I will talk about at the end of the video what happened there. We're kicking off our morning with a ham and croissant sandwich in a Art Deco style cafe. They're really into Art Deco here, so that was really fun to see. And then we went for our next stack of money, which only took about a half hour. This here is about $200 of US dollars in Argentinian banknotes. I'll talk also more at the end of the video about this and why they're such a giant stack, but these did make me feel like I robbed a bank. This is more like cash than I've ever had in hand before. And from here we grabbed an Uber to head to the Recoleta neighborhood, which is where we have a tour later today, as well as a giant cemetery that I really wanted to see. We again stopped at a cafe. They do not joke about their lemonade, their brunch, or their cafes in general. Cafe culture here is A+. And then from here we entered the cemetery. We didn't have as much time today as I wanted, so I'm just going to give you kind of a brief overview, and next time I go, we'll talk a little bit more about the cemetery. I go in my second Argentinian video because again, I just felt like we didn't get to spend enough time here, and cemeteries are weirdly special to me when I travel. I always tend to visit a cemetery, and this is one of the coolest ones I've ever visited. The Recoleta Cemetery was built in 1732, or at least that's where it started, with an old church that eventually disbanded, was no longer there, and so it was redone in 1822 and has not been remodeled since 1881. It has about 14-acre and little over 4,500 vaults. These are all really elaborate, beautiful mausoleums, and they have a ton of different architectural styles here, which I think is really cool. I enjoyed seeing so many types of styles because there's everything from Art Deco, Art Nouveau, Baroque, Gothic, or I guess Neo-Gothic technically, and a lot of the materials that are here from Paris and Milan, which is just really wild. It actually feels and like was designed to feel kind of like a neighborhood when you walk around it, which you can definitely feel, and it was just overall a really cool visit. I didn't do any of the famous tombs here on this round, so we'll talk about the famous tombs next round, but it was really fun to just walk around and see all the beautiful tombs. You can always tell a lot about a city with how their dead are taken care of. Of course, this is the elite dead. You have to have a lot of money to afford a mausoleum just in general, let alone one in a famous cemetery. You also see a lot in various states of repair or disrepair. Some of these have pretty much fallen apart. These are ones that usually the families can't afford to keep up, and then there are ones that the families do afford to keep up, and I believe you can even sell your mausoleums here. Don't totally know how all that works, and I probably never will because I don't personally have any desire to be buried, but if I did, it would be a mausoleum because I think the way these are done are really cool, and you're kind of with family forever, and I would actually, I think, really enjoy designing a mausoleum, even though none of these things are ever going to happen for me in real life because I don't care enough about what happens to me when I die. It is really wild how many parts of this cemetery feel like walking down like a little mini city street, which again, I know it was designed to do that, but it was really fascinating to see. And a lot of these mausoleums had really beautiful stained glass in them. I really wish you could just go in and see the stained glass. I understand why not. This is places people mourn, but the stained glass in these were pretty insane. Now we've met up with our tour guide, and she is taking us around starting with what was the old Teatro Grand Splendide, which was basically like supposed to be built like a Paris opera. It was a theater that was built in 1919. It's a really, really beautiful space. I love repurposed spaces, and this theater has been repurposed into a giant bookstore. It is absolutely stunning, and they left a lot of the original art and lighting in, which is so cool. And this was really, really detailed and one of the most beautiful theaters I've ever been in. Throughout this tour, we saw a ton of French architecture, including this building, which is absolutely beautiful. There are statues, and it just has that really Paris look. And then this building here is, funny enough, I believe it's the sanitation department. It was built to have water tanks in it back in the Victorian era, and since it was in a wealthy neighborhood, the wealthy people demanded the water towers be beautiful, and so this building was the result of that. And this building is absolutely stunning. It's very, I guess you could say, over the top and loud, but I love architecture style like this. Like, I hate the modern blah architecture, and I find architecture like this so beautiful and interesting. We didn't end up going to it. The tour guide doesn't recommend it, but there is actually a museum of toilets in here that I think has something like 3,000 different toilets in it, because this is where they test new toilets, I guess, before they authorize them, and I just thought that was kind of funny. And such a funny thing to be housed in such a beautiful building. And here we have some great examples of different architecture styles. The one to the right is very Art Nouveau, and then we'll go a little further to like a neoclassical. The mix of European architecture in Buenos Aires was just something I didn't expect, and I thought was really, really cool. And again, as you look around, there's just such different architecture with modern and Art Deco and Art Nouveau. This is a beautiful Art Nouveau. I love this style, specifically when the panes of glass are rounded like this, because that is something that no one's going to do anymore, and I think is really cool. And we also stopped by this Art Deco style mall, which was built later in place of a market that was very Art Deco style. On the back side of the mall, these are some of the original pieces from the original market. She then led us into one of the more working class neighborhoods in Buenos Aires. One of the really interesting things she shows here, this here is a little temple to Gaucho Gil, which is like a folk religious figure in Argentina. The basic story is that the sheriff hunted him down, and he told the sheriff that his son was going to die of sickness, and then the sheriff killed him for being an outlaw, and then his son got sick, and the sheriff prayed to Gaucho Gil to heal his son. His son was healed, and now Gaucho Gil is kind of like Robin Hood figure and a kind of folkish saint altar figure where people leave him gifts. And I love traditions like this. I think they're super cool and really important to learn about when you're in other countries, because I think they're one of the things that makes other countries really unique. She then took us through a neighborhood where the houses feature filet Teatro, which is a decorative style that is original to Buenos Aires. It features all these really beautiful swirls, a specific style of lettering, and it will usually feature Argentine flags, Argentine colors, which is all the blue and the white you see there, as well as floral designs. They will also always be symmetrical and completely fill up the space. I really enjoyed seeing these houses. I thought this was such a cool style, and obviously it's really exciting to see a style like this in the place it was born. I also really, really enjoyed this tour. I will talk more about why I actually enjoyed this tour in my next video. We just got to know the tour guide and a bunch of different things pretty well, which was exciting. I always try to book the smallest tours possible, because then you can actually ask questions and have a real cultural exchange, which we were able to have here. Here in this area is where we wrapped up the tour, which means we kind of were done for the day. Overall, I love this tour. We learned so much from our guide Elisa, and this very much felt like a cultural exchange where she taught us, really cool things about Argentina and politics, and I taught her what a sausage fest is. So, super equal cultural exchange. Italian food for dinner before heading to bed. And now it is the next morning, and we are headed out by the ferry from Buenos Aires to Colonia del Sacramento, which was a Portuguese fortress city that was built in the 1680s. This always kind of changed hands weirdly between Spain, Portugal, and Britain before eventually becoming part of Uruguay. So it was super fun to take the ferry over there and see a UNESCO Heritage World Site. First thing we did when we got there was to find somewhere to eat, which was actually quite challenging, and this was the only cafe open. So we got our usual ham and cheese croissants before then wandering into this church that was looking over the restaurant we ate at. This church was fairly simple inside, which is totally fine. It was just interesting after I've spent a lot of time in Rome, where obviously those churches are very similarly structurally on the outside, but are a lot more ornate on the inside compared to this one. And then from here, we just kind of wandered around, honestly, most of the day, wandering down all these cobblestone roads with these beautiful buildings off of it. It did feel, again, very European, which most of this trip felt very European. I really enjoyed this, and there were a lot of plants here that reminded me of Greece. There really is just something about the aesthetics here that I enjoyed a lot. Walking around and seeing the way like potted plants were paired with buildings and the different colorings on the buildings and things like that. I thought it was absolutely stunning, and also it's just always wild to think about how old these places are. There were actually quite a few ruins here, and we did eventually wander up to the lighthouse here, which you can go up, but I did not feel like doing those stairs with how much we were already walking that day. And sorry if this is just too much footage of walking around, but I enjoy all the different graffiti and again just the aesthetics of the buildings. I do want to mention around kind of Uruguay in general, you're going to see a lot of rainbows. They just came off their Pride celebration, and it's always really cool to be in another country that supports gay rights because there's shockingly not that many, so it's always nice to be in one. We also spent a lot of time walking kind of on the shore. I enjoyed this particular area. I just in general found it interesting how much like greenery into rock was on the shore. And then the water itself also was very like murky, which I'm just not super used to seeing. I assume this is because this is where a big river connects with the ocean. And of course there are dogs I desperately tried to befriend, and they gave zero fluffs about me, and it made me sad. It's like they knew I was thirsty. We walked so much this day. I was so sore after, but it was worth every second. This square is actually where there's quite a few ruins of different parts of the church that we saw earlier. I just thought that was really interesting. I'm always a fan of ruins, and I like having plaques to read about them. Also, very side note, but we were here for wisteria season, which was very exciting for me because you know I love wisteria, and look at how much is in this tree here. And here is a closer look at those ruins, sort of. As close as we can get without, you know, breaking laws. And look at this. We sat under this beautiful wisteria. I felt so lucky to get to enjoy this, and the bees were buzzing and the dogs were going by. It was delightful. Here's a different perspective on the cafe we ate at. And here is the oldest street in the city, I believe, which is the Street of Sighs, which is named for a certain type of work that happened here, where the sailors would come straight into port to find their women, if you know what I mean. I don't need to get banned, so I am not going to further explain, but you can definitely tell the walls of these are pretty old, or at least aren't allowed to be like upkept and repasted over the same way buildings in other part of the city are. These are definitely just left a little bit more historical in general. We also kind of walked quite a bit around the old fortress walls, which was pretty neat, because again, these are super old, and I always love seeing old stonework because I know how much work that takes. And here I'm probably going to put on super speed mode so you can see all the different colors. This street was particularly color and had a periwinkle house, which is the dream, for me at least. I also thought the tile work on this building was pretty insane. Like, that's just so much work, and I deeply appreciate it. And after all that walking, we were pretty exhausted, so we just sat here and enjoyed all the birds. There were tons of different types of really cool birds over here, and enjoyed the ocean views while kind of sitting on the old fortress wall, which was just really enjoyable and peaceful, and it was really nice to spend some time in nature. And then it was time to get back on the ferry, which is obviously what's happening here. I just kind of wanted to show you the ferry. The ferry is super nice. There's like stores and cafes and things in it. I haven't really experienced anything like it. I will say I did not like the color of the seating. Light pastels is kind of not the vibe for something traveled on a lot. We stumbled across this kind of random gallery of work that I thought was really beautiful. It felt like Buenos Aires. You could really just stumble upon art anywhere and everywhere, and I think that's really, really cool. We got ice cream. Here is my friend's normal amount of ice cream, and here's the half kilo I accidentally ordered because I was overconfident in my Spanish. This is the ice cream shop that I just thought was very beautiful. And it's another morning, another brunch. I got this lovely salmon bagel and some orange juice. And then the cafe was so cute. This is a chain, but it was really, really quite stunning, and I enjoyed eating here. I had another tour today. Before that, we just kind of wandered around Palermo and just enjoyed a bunch of different parks, including this park. I loved these orange flowers. I don't know what they are, but they are stunning. I felt so lucky to be in spring when we were in fall in the States. One thing me and my friend couldn't stop talking about is how many parks there were, and not just how many parks, but how many places you could actually sit in parks. In America, now there's so much hostile architecture that makes it hard for you to want to like sit and stay in a park very long. And here there was so much seating, which was also really great because like both of us had like knee things and both generally deal with chronic pain, so we had lots of places to just sit and enjoy the city around us without having to buy something. And I just thought that was a really interesting thing coming from a country that's really hostile to this type of thing. There were so many places to just sit. That shouldn't be remarkable, but it is, because that's just not how it is where I live in Seattle. Where I live in Seattle, they do everything they can to make sure a homeless person can't lay down, and as a result it punishes everybody, not just the homeless people, which I also don't think we should be punishing that way either. We sat by this fountain and just watched this fountain and all the dogs go by for easily like a half hour to an hour. We enjoyed it so much, and I loved the pink tree. I really loved the parks here, and I really loved being able to walk around and find a place to sit. And now we're entering what I believe is Palermo, Hollywood. Again, we have these old cobblestone streets, and what I'm more interested in is there is just a lot of art here. In general, I would say in Buenos Aires, there's so much street art. Little pieces like this. I adored this piece, by the way. If I could hang or make this piece to sit in my home, I absolutely would. There's just so much street art here compared to, again, where I live, or compared to most places I've been. It felt like there were murals everywhere as opposed to like one little section that was set aside for murals. We're just going to walk around and you're going to see a ton of interesting murals and colors and things like that. I really just thought this was very cool. Argentina just won the World Cup, so there's a lot of World Cup related murals, which are not super my vibe, but I enjoyed all the other murals. I will say, while walking around this neighborhood, I got a warning for somebody to like not have my GoPro out. I'm gonna personally say I did not feel like I was that worried about it, but I'm used to being in cities. I'll talk a little bit about safety in my next video about Argentina, but in general, I didn't really feel like people were gonna be snatching things out of my hands like I had been warned. Look at this beautiful work. We just kind of basically kept wandering and following where we saw more street art. So anytime we saw an interesting mural, I said, let's go there. I really liked this one. This one is something that I would want in like my house on a wall. I think it's really cool. And then we accidentally discovered, I believe there's just like a straight up big mural alley, which is what we are walking down right now, because this is more murals than anywhere else we've been in the city. Like as far as consistency, there's a mural pretty much everywhere here, and they're all really beautiful. So I will walk you up and down the sides of the street. The colors here are so vibrant, and if you watch my channel at all, you know how much I love vibrant colors. I particularly loved this piece here. But I, of course, enjoyed all the colors here. I took some cute little photos here. Enjoyed the street art here. It was very, very fun. Also, these purple flowers, super cool. This one down here is a little bit more like decoupage, for lack of a better term, but still super fun. And I thought it was interesting how many of these had like the LA angel wing type thing going on. I did, though, really like this storefront in general, that its whole mural was like black and white. We continued on our journey of following the murals. Again, more wings like the LA mural, that's really famous. So funny, I'm sure it's very popular with tourists. Again, you're just seeing so much street art, and I enjoyed this. We were here not super early in the morning, it was like maybe 10 a.m. and it didn't feel like there were that many people here, so if you want this experience when there's not a ton of crowds, this is definitely what I would recommend. I thought this one here, this mural, was so funny. There's also like a miniature version of the mural that's like a mural and a mural and a mural, and I love it. Very meta. And then there were definitely people like posing for their Instagrams here, which I did too, so no judgment here. And I thought this was just an interesting mural. It felt like it was maybe making a statement about technology or trying to sell technology. I don't know which. Not really getting the full scale here very well. This mural here with all the stencil work I thought was really, really fun. This is just a great use of repetition. Repetition is always a really effective way to fill up a space like this. You can see the same stencils used over and over again, but it's still really effective. Also, I would like to note the beautiful, colorful trash can here. I was delighted. And also the weird Edward Scissorhands behind it. So fun to see here the Fleteado Porteño, like mixed with all the more modernized street art. It was just really cool. I really liked the way they did this building. I'm not usually an orange or a green fan or a red fan, but for some reason the way this building is done, I absolutely adored. This here was a universal church that I enjoyed. It was so pastel and cute. And I thought this building here was so zany and fun. Like they did it as much as to make sure those lines went across all these ornate details, which this is very challenging to do and have them look straight. Next up was my vintage tour. So I met with the guide. It was just me and her one-on-one. So this first one that you're seeing me in, this is actually like, it's somehow tied to theater. And it's either selling like the theater's costumes or something like that. I know there's like actually kind of some famous actresses stuff sold here. And I did pick up a couple things here that I absolutely love. And it was just overall a really interesting thrift shop. And then this next place that we're going is one of, I believe, their biggest and like original thrift shops. As you can see, there's lots of wedding dresses right when you come in. I kind of sorted through these, but I knew I wasn't going to be buying a wedding dress out here. I mean, again, not getting married. Not that that stopped me from buying a wedding dress before, but this place was massive. This would be a pretty big vintage shop even for the States. And I will super recommend this tour. It was so helpful to have a guide that speaks Spanish because, again, my Spanish is very, very, very poor. And at the end of this video, I'll actually talk. They had a really interesting tag system to go with the whole inflation problem. Upstairs, they had a bunch of piles you could sort through and all like the cheaper stuff. So I did go on a bit of a hunt here. I didn't find anything upstairs, but I was also being pretty picky because obviously I have limited luggage space and my trip is really towards the beginning. I hope the lighting isn't flickering the whole time of this recording, but if it is, bear with me. This piece is phenomenal. This shop is called Bimba. It actually has an online shop, so I will link that. Oh, I wish this wasn't doing this, but these clothes were fantastic. I had a hard time narrowing it down to one. The owner of this shop's name is Jasmine. And she was really, really lovely, very, very passionate about what she does. And she had some pieces unlike anything I've ever seen before, including this pink piece here. I loved this shop. I could have spent a gajillion dollars at this shop, but I only had the cash I had on me. And the shop owner was so lovely. And after that tour, I went with my friend to a German spot. This place was pretty good, but it took forever to get our food and drinks. It was wild. And also look at, again, there's some fun neon wings. These ones I actually really liked. And of course they had a World Cup neon as well. But that wraps up our day. It is first thing in the morning. And of course we went to a coffee shop to get our little croissant and cafe. I thought this was very cute. This coffee shop actually was, it sounds like modeled after ones in Seattle. We talked to the guy who owns it and he had been to Seattle a bunch. So I thought that was interesting. Other than that, today is our last day in the Palermo area of Buenos Aires. We're going to head on to Uruguay where we will stay there for a little bit. But today is garden day. The gardens were all really close to our hotels. So we thought it would be perfect for us to walk the gardens before checkout time. This here is their main botanical garden. You can again see a lot of that Victorian styling. I'm sure this was built pretty similar in timeline to the eco park that we went to at the beginning. Like I said, a lot of what you see in this city is very Victorian or Edwardian in style because of the decades that they were wealthy. So yeah, I will say this botanical gardens had really beautiful architecture and it might be more amazing in proper spring. We were here in the very, very, very early bits of spring. However, they're very under-maintained compared to botanical gardens in other parts of the world, but I still recommend visiting. They had quite a lot of beautiful statues and art in this park, I will say that, even if I wouldn't say it was the most maintained botanical garden I've ever been in. There was a lot of art. And then their star of the show to me was, they had actually a lot of Victorian greenhouses, but this one was beautiful. We weren't there when they actually had it open to the public, but just looking at it from the outside was beautiful enough. It is a stunning greenhouse. Here's that same greenhouse from the back. My toxic trait is thinking I want a beautiful giant greenhouse like this, even though I can't keep a plant alive to save my life. But look at how beautiful this is. There were also lots of beautiful fountains in here. As you've seen, this is the second. I do believe most of the art pieces here are actually like reproductions of things you can see in Europe. Here is a much smaller greenhouse that I think could actually be more practical for my plant killing lifestyle. This was very much a naked lady statue garden, which I thoroughly enjoyed. They had some really, really, really beautiful neoclassical statues that were absolutely stunning. They also, of course, had a yerba mate patch. It was interesting to see how this is grown because mate is something you see everywhere here. Also, again, there are those little pink trees I love so much. We actually did get to catch some butterflies near the butterfly garden, which was exciting. It was so nice to be somewhere where spring was just starting to bloom. Also, I don't know why it surprised me, but they had a spectacular cactus garden. All these cactuses were very, very tall and very, very big, and for some reason I expected this to be too rainy of a place for them. There were cats in this garden, and I was so desperate for them to say hi, but they wanted nothing to do with me, and it was quite offensive and heartbreaking. I sneaked a little peek into this greenhouse, and I wanted to go in so bad. And that was it for this garden. Our next stop was the Japanese garden, which actually we're here in a really good blooming time because the azaleas were blooming, which was super exciting and also very confusing because I was comparing the blooming schedule here to the blooming schedule in Seattle, and I know they're not really the same at all, but I was confused because azaleas usually come way before wisteria, so the fact that both can be in bloom at the same time was very confusing for me. The azaleas were blooming nonetheless, and it was super gorgeous. This garden you did have to pay a ticket fee to enter, and I feel like you can very tell by how immaculate the grounds are in this garden. This is a very, very, very well upkept garden. I will say there were tons of school tours here. Actually, there were a lot at the Botanical Gardens too, but here this garden is really, really small, and so having like 6 school tours was not the vibe. But look at this cute little display. I guess they change the date out every day. I really enjoyed this garden, and honestly, garden hopping was the perfect way to spend some time before we began our journey to Uruguay. I feel like here's a good vantage point where you can kind of see how crowded the garden is. Like, these are all single person trails or maybe 2 by 2 people trails, and I think it's just really hard to navigate large groups in here. There were a lot of what felt like high schoolers in here, and we definitely got a little bit like stuck at times, not being able to escape because the paths were so crowded. And I know we weren't even seeing this during a busy time, so I can't imagine how busy this must get. We stopped by, of course, where the wisteria is growing before making our exit because both of us got way too overwhelmed by how crowded these gardens were. We then came very full circle. This is actually the first park we spent the time watching the greyhounds in when we were waiting for our hotel. You can see I wanted to get some on camera, which was exciting that we saw them. The dog walkers out here just walk around with these massive herds of dogs, and they take them to these parks where they let them basically all off leash to roam. Here is what that looks like because everyone talks about the dog walkers here, and it is really truly a sight to see. But with that, I'm saying bye to Buenos Aires for now, and we're on our ferry headed to Montevideo. Alright, you have seen all the footage. I had a couple things that I said I was going to reference later or talk a little bit more about, so we're going to go through those. First up is kind of like the Western Union blue dollar money thing. Argentina is really strange. I have not been to another country like this where there are 2 currency exchanges. One is the official, which isn't great, and the other is called the blue dollar rate, which gets you basically double the amount of money for the same amount of US dollars. My understanding is this is just because of the economy there and the way inflation works. Basically, the government wants to limit how much money people can put in the US dollar because of the way the inflation there works. For example, we were there 2 weeks and the inflation went up 25%. So like by comparison in America, I think we went up like 25% over the year. So imagine going through that amount of inflation in just 2 weeks. So like our money lost a lot of value during that time, which was fine. The Western Union is the only way to go through an official bank and get the blue dollar rate. So that's what we chose to do. You can also bring a bunch of like US dollar, specifically $100 bills that are super crisp and nice, and you can exchange those, and I believe they're called the cambios, which means you have to like negotiate with an actual person. Since my Spanish was not good enough for that, we opted to go the Western Union route, even though the lines were really long. I think The first time we waited an hour and a half, and the second time we waited 30 minutes. Extra recommend if you can do this and not have to go there on a Sunday. There's only like 2 Western Unions, I think, in the whole city open on a Sunday, which is why that line was so long. That was kind of the scoop. And then the other thing that happened for us is while we were waiting for the Western Union, second time I believe, they didn't have any like $1,000 or $2,000 bills, which is really what you need, and it still makes you have to count out a silly amount of money. I would say they're like $2,000 and $1,000 bills while we were there were equivalent to like a 10 and a 5 maybe even like a 5, and if we still had a $2 bill. But the second time I went there, when I showed you that giant stack of money, we got 100 denomination. I got 100, my friend I was traveling with got 200. So it made us have to get like a pretty good system going for when we went to restaurants, because having 100 was like having, it wasn't quite like as low as quarters, but it was like having to pay in probably like dollars for everything, maybe even like 50 cents pieces. So we came up with a system where we would count our stacks before we went out. So we would count them into stacks of 10 that we knew how much was in each, and then we would fold them, and you would have kind of them all rubber band together, but you knew each fold was 10, so it was 1,000. That worked really well for us. It did seem like people there were used to seeing chaotic money like this. Waitresses were definitely shaking their head about it, but they blamed it on the cambios, even though that's not the route we went. Those are just some interesting money things that I've just not encountered anywhere else in any other country. I know they say you can use your Visa and you still get the blue dollar rate. I'm gonna say I'm just a little skeptical of that, because I did use my Visa a couple times there on like some bigger purchases, and I don't think I was getting as good of a rate as the blue dollar rate. So that's just my opinion. Visa says what they say. I don't know if it's because then they add on, I believe like a lot of places they were communicating like then they have to do the 22% tax if you use a Visa, as opposed to like taking the money under the table sort of. I think that also might be why I didn't feel like the Visa rate was quite as good. All that's to say, figure out how to do the blue dollar rate and expect to pay with cash. So next thing I'm going to talk about is kind of tours and my philosophy on booking tours. I do not like big group tours. I really prefer a small group tour. I don't want to be on a bus. The biggest thing I want to be on is like a van that fits like 8-9 people tops. So the way I figure this out is I figured out to look on Airbnb experiences. I don't believe in booking Airbnb for like my places to stay. I'm a strictly hotel person. They do have this thing called experiences, and what you can do is you can check basically each experience, and you can kind of check how they're cross-listed and things like that. And if they're not cross-listed, it will often be a small tour. We looked out, and both the tours I booked for this trip were just us and the guide. So that was really exciting because that lets you have a more authentic exchange. I'm going to talk about it in the next video, but we were able to talk politics with our one guide, as well as learn a lot about what it was like for her to live in the country when it was under the military regime and dictatorship. So that was really interesting. I did mention in the voiceover, I in turn taught her what a sausage fest or a sausage party is, which she was pretty amused by. It's just always fun to have that cultural exchange. And there are times where it's maybe a little less fun to have cultural exchange with my vintage tour guide, which I want to be clear, I really, really enjoyed talking with her, but learning what life is like in Argentina right now is not particularly bright and happy. To her, she was saying how she was trying to rent a place, but because of inflation, the places that were rented would only accept US dollars for rent, which meant basically she's like, I don't have any idea how to get US dollars. I can't get US dollars on a scale where I can rent, so it was preventing her from being able to move out from her family. Talking to her briefly about like there's a presidential campaign while I was there, and how she felt both candidates were not good and corrupt, and just kind of really feeling let down by the government. As well as the other thing I experienced was while buying vintage from the one shop, they opened the app to look at the blue dollar rate for the day because I paid with American dollars, and like both of them started swearing because it had like inflation had gone up so much. It was heartbreaking. I mean, understanding how inflation impacts these people, it's not fun. But it really, I feel like, informed my lens from how I viewed being there. Like, while it was really, I guess, fun for things to be so cheap for me there, I understood the reality of why they were so cheap and what that meant from the people who lived there, and it definitely, like, just put that in perspective. And I think it's really important to have fun where you travel, and I still had a blast, but I think it's also important to understand some of the different dynamics happening where you are that affect the people who actually live there, because ultimately, one of the reasons I travel is to experience experience different cultures, and some of experiencing different cultures is understanding some really, really negative things going on in that culture at the time that you're there. Anyone who travels frequently will tell you it's just really common to end up in countries and hear just more about the politics and the things that aren't working there. And that's just kind of part of travel if you're not just going through like an American-centric, like not willing to engage with culture type of way. Of course, if you decide you want to be blind to all these issues, you absolutely can. I just think when you travel, you shouldn't. And it was interesting to see all the different ways they handled inflation. The restaurant menus, you would come over and from one day to the next, it would like be like white taped down with new prices written. And then the way the vintage shop, that one of the vintage shops that I went to, the really big one, was done is they actually had, so it was like 20, it was like a number and then X, and that denoted how much something was. And then that X was basically like a multiplier where it was like 3 or 4 or 24 depending on the inflation for the day. I thought that was really interesting, and it was very sobering, but also very interesting to see all the systems that all these places had to go around inflation. I noticed most of the high-end vintage boutiques we went to just used US dollars because it kept the prices the same, and you might pay in pesos, but you're going to still be paying the same amount in US dollars. So those were a couple different ways that we saw it. Other places we went, they kind of had almost like fixed price menus where everything is like one price and then they can change that price for the day. So yeah, just really, really interesting. I've not really traveled anywhere with like an economic condition like this. The last thing I was just going to mention on why I liked the hotel we stayed in this video a lot. It was really clean. It was really nice. However, I do think they kind of ran a little bit of a scam on me because I didn't speak Spanish fluently. When you travel a lot, you have a good instinct. And so basically what happened is it was 15 minutes before we're going to check out. I was up in my room and I got a call, and the person on the phone said they needed my WhatsApp number. Make sure when you travel internationally to have WhatsApp. Everybody around the world uses it. But they wanted my WhatsApp number, and they, I will say, spoke English very well. They then proceeded to message me about how my hair dye had blood on the sheets and damaged them, and they were going to need to charge me. They were trying to charge me $180 US for 2 pillowcases. And I also want to note that they changed out these pillowcases. So that means they kept like replacing the stuff I was damaging when I was like, okay, I would have rather paid for 1 pillowcase, right? So then I went down and I paid it in pesos. I insisted on paying it in pesos. And so since I paid it on pesos, it came out to about $98 for 2 pillowcases. And like, I've done a ton of Googling, and typically it is not that much to pay for damaging a pillowcase. But also we stayed in the next 4 weeks. I stayed in 3 different hotels, and not a single other hotel charged me for damaging the sheets. So just instinctually, it just felt like something was off there, and I do think I got scammed. So I would just maybe buyer beware this hotel if you don't speak fluent Spanish. I would, even though I loved the location and I loved everything about it, I would not stay there again unless I was fluent in Spanish. I'm somebody who has no problem arguing with people, so if I had spoken fluent Spanish. Also, I felt like it was kind of convenient that when I came down to the front desk, no one there spoke English suddenly, when that was not the case in other cases. My spidey senses say I got scammed, and it's fine. It's not fine, but like, it was less than $100, and you just can't let stuff like that ruin your trip. So yeah, that's why I would not recommend that hotel. And don't worry, I have left reviews stating this. So that is the scoop on the hotel. Also, I don't want to end on the bad scam note. Overall, the people there were really, really wonderful. Some of them take a little time to warm up, but once they warm up to you, it's super fun and they're pretty chatty. And like, I found the service there to be, I really overall found everything to be super wonderful. And yeah, I don't want to leave on that bad scammy note because I 100% probably wouldn't change anything. Like, I wouldn't have changed staying at that hotel. I think it was a good experience. I think it was a great area. And honestly, when I hopefully one day return to Buenos Aires, I won't stay in the same area that I stayed in anyway, so it's not a huge deal. And yeah, the warmth the guides showed me and the warmth these vintage shop owners showed me was just a huge highlight of my trip. I always love getting to know people. I guess also, if you're wondering, can you travel here with bad Spanish? The answer is yes. I will cover kind of more of my final thoughts on traveling to Argentina in my Argentina Part 2 video, which will come in 2 weeks, I think. So stay tuned for that. As always, subscribe and stick around. I would love to have you. And normally this is a little bit more sewing, thrifting, and vintage based. However, I do these travel vlogs occasionally. But yeah, I will see you actually at the end of this week. This is a bonus video, and I will see you again on Friday to talk about my time in Uruguay. Bye!